I wore my truth in red, then watched a rich man's arrogance shatter under one unforgettable slap. Before we dive into my story, hit subscribe so we can grow this space together. I used to believe that silence was safety. That if I made myself small enough, quiet enough, the world would forget to bruise me. I grew up under a leaking tin roof in East Hammond, where dreams evaporated faster than morning rain. My mother worked night shifts at the county hospital, leaving me curled up between dusty medical encyclopedias in the staff storage room. I learned to sleep between the anatomy of lungs and heart murmurs, not because I wanted to, but because silence meant I wouldn't be asked to leave. In 5th grade, I wore a faded red dress from a flea market to school. I thought it made me look like the girls in books Bright, Confident noticed. But the moment I walked into class, someone called me the lost black Barbie. Laughter exploded. Even my teacher chuckled before whispering, "Honey, some colors are too loud for some skin tones." That day, I stopped wearing red. And I carried that shame into womanhood like a scar wrapped in fabric. Every time I passed by something beautiful, bold lipstick, bright earrings, a dress that danced in the light, I'd hear her voice again, clipping my wings before they ever opened. Now I live in a world made of paper and dust. I'm a librarian in an old city library, barely holding itself together. Each book feels like it's breathing, waiting to be touched. But no one comes. Sometimes I wonder if people like me are only allowed to exist where no one's looking. In the evenings, I handcraft leather book covers and sell them online. No names, no faces, just silent transactions between invisible people. And somehow, that's always made me feel safe. Then Elijah arrived. He didn't talk about success or money. He didn't ask why I avoided mirrors or why my wardrobe looked like grayscale. He just listened. And when he smiled, it felt like a soft landing after a long fall. But even then, I never believed I was enough. One rainy afternoon, he handed me an envelope sealed in gold. "It's an invitation," he said. "The Ardent Circle. Annual gala." I laughed. Me at something called Ardent, he didn't flinch. Just looked at me and said, "You need a dress that feels like you." I didn't realize then, he meant the version of me I hadn't met yet. I walked into the first boutique with trembling hands. Before I could even look around, a woman asked, "Do you have a price range, Mom?" Her smile was stiff. Calculated. I backed out. The second store was worse. I reached for a red satin gown almost instinctively, and the clerk grabbed my wrist, eyes cold. "Not for everyone," she said, voice coated in condescension. The third store didn't even speak. They just stared from head to toe, like trying to solve the mystery of how I'd slipped past their security system. I was ready to give up. But then, tucked behind an old jazz cafe, I found Madame Nora's. She didn't ask about money. She looked me straight in the eyes and smiled like she'd been expecting me. I tried on a sleek black dress. Safe. Predictable. Then she pulled out a red one, deep crimson, almost defiant, and whispered, "You don't have to hide anymore. It's time they see you." I hesitated. My mother used to say, "Don't dress too loud if you don't want to be looked at too long." But I slipped into the red gown. And in the mirror for the first time, I didn't see the poor girl trying to look decent. I saw a woman unlearning how to apologize for her presence. There are memories that stick to your skin. For me, it was her voice warning me not to stand out. But let me ask you something. How many times have you silenced yourself just to stay safe? How many times have you walked away from something you loved because you were told it wasn't for you? That day I didn't wear red to be bold. I wore it so I wouldn't be afraid of being seen anymore. The gala was unlike anything I'd ever known. Crystal chandeliers like frozen fireworks, string quartets echoing off marble servers who moved like shadows. Elijah held my hand gently, but his eyes drifted. This world belonged to him, not to me. That's when I saw him. Braden Locke. He didn't smile. He assessed. Like I was a figure behind glass. His eyes trailed every seam of my dress, every inch of skin I hadn't meant to expose. And in that moment, my armor, the red I thought made me brave, suddenly felt like a target. A group nearby whispered, laughing behind flutes of champagne. Prom night just got upgraded. They didn't even try to hide it. To them, I wasn't a guest. I was a punchline in pearls. My mother used to come home from work with that same look, shoulders tight, eyes hollow, after being called just the help. And now under the glow of chandeliers, I carried that same weight. Have you ever felt observed, but never really seen, like your presence was tolerated, but your soul completely ignored? But this time, I didn't walk away. I stood there, in red, not shaking from fear but trembling from defiance. I wasn't meant to be seen, but I was there, and the night was just beginning. Red on brown, Braden said smoothly, eyes never leaving the neckline of my dress. His smile was too perfect, too polished, like a blade that had been sharpened for show, but could cut you in half if you got too close. I didn't respond. I took a small step back, hoping distance might restore the space he had already invaded. But for every inch I gave, he moved a half step forward, as if we were locked in a silent game of dominance, where I didn't know the rules. I scanned the crowd for Elijah. He was across the room, deep in conversation with 3 men who looked like they owned pieces of entire cities. I heard snippets of smart contracts, decentralized portfolios, multi-layered authorizations. I didn't understand a word. And worse, I didn't feel like I was allowed to. I didn't want to interrupt him. I didn't want to be that woman. But I also didn't want to be here stuck in the middle of an expensive room I didn't belong to with a man who smiled like he had already decided what I was worth. No one noticed me as I drifted away, not even the servers who moved around me like I was air. Every glance that grazed over me wasn't out of curiosity. It was dismissal. A silent sentence passed down by the room. She doesn't belong here. She shouldn't have worn that. She shouldn't have come. There's a kind of silence louder than noise. Have you ever stood in a room and felt everyone wanted you gone without saying a word? The gala didn't need to reject me with words. Their eyes did the job just fine. Trying to breathe, I wandered toward the art display. The centerpiece was a sculpture of a black woman, wrists bound, eyes covered with cloth, mouth gagged. She stood tall still but barely. Something inside me trembled. I didn't feel like a victim, I felt like a witness. Not to her pain, but to everyone who had ever been told to endure in silence. I saw the 5th-grade version of myself in that statue, the girl in the red dress who had been laughed at, and then told she brought it on herself by trying too hard. Difference. Braden's voice came again, closer. This time is only a liability if you don't know how to profit from it. I hadn't even heard him approach. He was so close I could feel his breath along my temple. His hand grazed my wrist lightly, almost innocently. Just enough to unnerve me. Not enough to accuse. That moment I didn't feel like a person. I felt like currency. When power wants something, it doesn't shout. It just steps too close. And the worst part is, you start wondering if you're the one who did something wrong just for existing. I broke away searching for Elijah. But he was gone, swallowed by the crowd, or maybe the room had simply decided I wasn't worth being found. The music swelled. Someone laughed nearby. Glass clinked. But I was frozen in a moment. No one else seemed to inhabit. Braden didn't pause. "Penthouse is just upstairs," he said. Voice like warm syrup, and I've got champagne chilled. Big bed. Privacy. You'd be surprised how freeing it feels to stop pretending. I took another step back. He caught my wrist. Tight this time. In that instant, I wasn't 32. I was 10 again, standing on the school stage, red dress trembling while the crowd laughed and no one told them to stop. Physical touch hurts. But the way they strip your dignity with words, God, that's the wound you don't bandage. I looked at him and said just loud enough to matter, "Let go of me, or I'll scream." His eyes sparkled like he found that amusing. "And who's going to believe you?" He didn't loosen his grip. I did scream, but it came out like breath. A whisper lost beneath the music. This is how the cycle works, isn't it? You start wondering if maybe your neckline was too low. Your laugh too polite. Your presence too open. Because the moment a woman starts blaming herself for being targeted, that's not a personal problem anymore. That's society whispering, "Stay quiet or else." I yanked hard. My wrist twisted, sending a sharp pain up to my elbow. I stumbled back, hitting the edge of a display table. No one turned. No one cared. A server walked past, tray in hand, never glancing my way. Braden stepped forward again, calm as ever, like a man who had done this before and had never seen consequences. He leaned in. "I know what women like you need," he whispered. But this time, I didn't retreat. I straightened my spine, met his eyes, and said, "You really think you're the first man to talk like that to me?" His lips curled. "Maybe, but I'll be the last." He reached again, and that's when I heard the sound. Not a shout, not a crash. A voice. Behind us. Cold. Measured. Final. Actually, it said she's my wife. His hand slammed against the wall just inches from my face, and I flinched. Cold stone pressed into my back, unforgiving and sharp, like the panic in my chest. Braden leaned in his breath, a cocktail of whiskey and entitlement, heavy and sour. One of his hands pinned my wrist against the wall, fingers digging into my skin like I was something to be restrained, not respected. His eyes, they didn't look at me. They devoured me, slicing straight through the fabric of my dress, as if undressing me with pure disdain. "You wear red like you want attention?" he whispered, voice soaked in smugness. "Don't pretend you don't know what it does." I shook my head, heart hammering. My other hand pushed against his chest, feeble compared to his grip. "Don't touch me," I said, or tried to. The words slipped out like vapor, too soft, too scared to exist. My mother's voice rang in my head like a warning bell from long ago. Girls who raise their voice only prove they're not raised right. But this wasn't about manners. This was survival. "I was invited here," he hissed, face inching closer. "Who even are you?" And then just as I opened my mouth to scream, his voice cut through the room. "Actually, she's my wife." Elijah's tone was calm, icy, lethal. 3 words spoken like a sentence passed down in court. Everything stopped. Music halted mid-note. Laughter was replaced by gasps. The clinking of glasses became silence. I turned my head. Elijah stood at the edge of the exhibit hall, shadowed by golden light, face unreadable. Braden's hand recoiled like it had touched fire. His face drained of color. And Elijah, he walked forward. Not fast. Not dramatic. Just steady, each step slicing the tension in the air like a blade. He didn't yell. He didn't flinch. His eyes never left Braden, and somehow that stillness carried more weight than any threat. "If she weren't my wife?" Elijah asked, stopping a few feet away. "What exactly were you planning to do next?" Braden's jaw twitched. "I thought she was just someone's +1. Elijah's reply came slowly. "And that gives you the right to corner her in the dark." He didn't need volume to dominate the room, he had presence. And everyone felt it. I had begged in silence 1,000 times before for anyone to step in. Just one voice brave enough to stop the humiliation before it branded me forever. Have you ever felt that, like you didn't need saving, just someone to remind you that you were worth defending? Elijah didn't raise his voice. He raised the room's awareness. And in that moment, he turned every stare, every silence, into a shield that stood between me and everything I had learned to fear. Braden took a step back, face contorting into something desperate, still clinging to dignity, like it was a torn sleeve. "She dressed like that. What did you expect people to think?" Elijah's eyes sharpened. "I expect people to think. But more than that, I expect them to know no misunderstanding should ever involve hands." Someone gasped. It was then that a voice rose from the crowd. A woman in a navy gown whispered to her date, "Wait, is that Elijah Duvall?" Heads turned. Phones lifted discreetly, and whispers bloomed like wildfire. "Elijah Duvall," someone echoed louder. "The founder of Duvall Syntech." I felt the shift ripple through the room. Suddenly, they weren't looking at me like I was misplaced. They were recalculating, reevaluating. Because I was no longer just the woman in the red dress. I was his woman in the red dress. Elijah reached me. His hand found mine, gentle yet firm. He didn't look at me. He didn't need to. His gaze remained locked on Braden as he said, "She needs no title. Her presence here is enough." And with those words, the oxygen in the room changed. A woman near the bar gave the faintest nod toward security. No one said a word, but everyone understood what was happening. 2 guards began moving quietly through the crowd. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible in a crowded room. Have you ever shouted without making a sound? Felt like if you vanished, no one would notice. I had lived in that silence for so long. It became my second skin. But Elijah shattered it, not with a scream, but with stillness. With truth. And that kind of presence, it doesn't ask permission to be believed. Braden, realizing the noose of public scrutiny tightening, stammered, "This is a misunderstanding." "Misunderstandings don't pin wrists to walls," Elijah replied. Security flanked Braden, but he raised his hands. "I'll go. No need to make a scene." Elijah didn't move. The scene already happened. You just expected no one to call it what it was. Braden looked around, searching for allies in the crowd, but found none. The people who'd laughed earlier were now silent, some ashamed, others stunned. They escorted him out, not roughly, but with the kind of finality that comes with a quiet, collective verdict. I stood beside Elijah, trembling not from fear, but from the weight of what had just passed. He leaned slightly toward me and whispered, "You okay?" I nodded. "Barely." We stood there for a few more seconds. Then he turned slowly, guiding me back through the crowd. People parted not like they did for royalty, but like they knew they had witnessed something true. And truth, when spoken plainly, doesn't need applause. It just needs to be heard. If you're still here, hit that like and subscribe, because this story, it's only just getting started. "I didn't mean anything by it. It was just a joke," Braden said. His voice stumbled forward like a man slipping on wet marble, desperate to stay standing, but already falling. "Everyone's been drinking tonight. You know how it is at these things." I stood frozen beside Elijah, our hands almost touching, but not quite. My wrist still ached faintly from Braden's grip, a phantom reminder of how close I'd come to being erased in plain sight. The room had gone quiet, not silent but quiet, in that trembling way a chandelier might sway after an earthquake. People whispered. A cough. The rustle of a napkin. But no one dared to interrupt. Elijah's chest rose and fell once. Then he took a breath, not a long one, but deep enough to settle something in the air. He stepped forward, voice low and deliberate. "You call pinning a woman to a wall, and demeaning her, a joke." Braden opened his mouth, perhaps to deny, perhaps to twist the words into something less sharp. "And if I did that to your sister?" Elijah's voice did not rise. "It didn't need to." "Would you still call it drinking too much?" There was no reply. Just the widening of Braden's eyes, and a flutter of confusion across his face, as if the script he'd rehearsed for years had suddenly been rewritten mid-sentence. He lifted his chin slightly, searching maybe for an ally, maybe for some lifeline of privilege. But he never got the words out. Because that's when Elijah stepped forward and slapped him. Not with rage. Not with theatrics. Just one clean motion, controlled, precise, like someone ringing a bell they'd been holding in for years. The sound cracked through the room. A glass slipped from the fingers of a young man in a navy suit and shattered on the floor. A woman near the bar gasped, one hand flying to her mouth. A security guard stiffened, hand hovering near his earpiece, but the hostess at the far end raised a handstand down. And Braden, he stood there, one hand pressed to the side of his face, his eyes wide with something between humiliation and disbelief. Red bloomed across his cheek, but it was nothing compared to the silence that followed. No one moved. No one clapped. No one spoke. Just a ballroom full of people, witnesses, now facing the reality that silence too could be a slap. I used to think silence was the weapon of the weak. That only loud voices could fight back, only screams could break injustice. But silence placed at the right moment, it cuts sharper than any scream. Have you ever wanted to push back just once, to say without words enough? That night Elijah didn't lecture. He didn't scream. He slapped, and suddenly everyone remembered what wrong felt like. Braden's eyes darted across the room, looking for someone, anyone, to save him. A white-haired man at the front table turned away without a word. A woman with pearls gathered her shawl and left. A couple in their 20s whispered behind their napkins. I caught one phrase: "He deserved that." Elijah didn't blink. "My wife," he said clearly, "is not a prop for your power or desire." He didn't raise his voice, didn't look around for support. He spoke to Braden like no one else existed. And in that moment, maybe no one else did. "And if staying silent is what you call being civil, then from now on I'll be uncivil." He didn't wait for a response. Didn't ask permission. He simply nodded once, and the security team, now moving with crisp professionalism, approached Braden. They didn't drag him. That would have made him a victim. They escorted him slowly, deliberately, through the sea of stares and silence. Braden didn't resist. What could he say? What words remain when the room no longer believes you? I'd never been in a room where justice won. Not really. Most of my life wrong came with applause, and right came with whispers. But that night, have you ever wondered what changes the world? Not who shouts the loudest. Not who points fingers. But the one who stays. Who stands. Elijah didn't have to be perfect. He just had to be someone who didn't look away. And for the first time in my life, I stood beside someone like that. As the doors closed behind Braden, the tension began to bleed from the air. Some guests shifted in their seats. Others picked up their glasses again, as if the wine could rinse away the taste of witnessing. I turned to Elijah. He hadn't moved since they'd taken Braden away. His jaw remained set, but I could feel it, his exhale barely a whisper, like the air itself was releasing something long held. Then his hand found mine. Warm. Steady. Real. I didn't say anything. Neither did he. But in the echo of that slap and the silence that followed, something inside me stood taller. Not just because Braden had been removed, but because no one had looked away. Because someone had finally said she matters. And that in itself was enough to break something open inside me. Something I hadn't known was still waiting to be set free. The moment the gala doors shut behind us, the cold air wrapped around me like a second skin. Elijah pulled me close, his coat slipping over my shoulders as he guided us through a narrow side exit. From a distance, flashes sparked paparazzi already assembling at the front like vultures drawn to fresh heat. But Elijah was one step ahead. The car waited silently, tucked into the shadows. No chauffeur. Just us. He opened the door, and I slid in, trembling, not from cold but from the weight of what had just unfolded. Elijah followed, shutting the world out behind him. For a long time, neither of us said anything. I leaned my head against the window, watching the city blur by in streaks of amber and steel. His jacket still hung over my shoulders. Across from me, Elijah loosened his tie, slid off his watch, and pulled his wallet from his pocket. Each gesture felt like shedding a layer until all that remained was him, unmasked, raw. I finally broke the silence. "Why didn't you say anything earlier tonight?" He turned to me, his voice calm but resolute. "Because I needed them to reveal who they really are." I blinked. If I stepped in too soon, they would have claimed I overreacted. Or protected you just because I could. But if I waited, let them show their nature fully, people would see for themselves. We arrived at the hotel. Elijah had reserved a suite beforehand, one so quiet it almost hummed. No staff, no lingering perfume of extravagance. Just silence and warm lighting that didn't demand attention. On the table near the fireplace sat a small wooden box. Curious, I opened it. Inside was a delicate silver pin the shape of a crescent moon, faintly worn by time. My breath caught. It was the hairpin my mother lost when I was 15. I'd searched for it for years before giving up, believing it had been swallowed by a crack in the world that never returned what it took. Elijah's voice came softly from behind. "I found it through a private auction group." "Had it restored?" "I thought maybe you should have back what was stolen. There are things we lose so often we stop thinking they're meant to be found." Have you ever convinced yourself that what's gone was never yours to keep? But Elijah, he didn't just find the pin. He believed I was still worthy of holding it, of reclaiming even the broken pieces of my story. I turned to him, and for the first time Elijah wasn't composed or guarded. He was just there, present. He sat down, his voice barely above a whisper. "I once loved someone who said she couldn't live in a world where I was always needed somewhere else. That loving me meant always being second." He looked up, meeting my eyes. "Since then, I've shown up only where I was required. Never where I was wanted. Until you. And that was it." The dam broke. Tears I'd held in through silence, through shame, through 1,000 unspoken humiliations, they found their way out. Not because of the pin. Not even because of the gala. But because someone finally saw me as more than someone to protect, but someone to choose. While we sat in that stillness, the world outside cracked wide open. Clips of the slap echoed across social media. Dozens of angles. The soundbite, Elijah's voice firm and sharp. "There's no misunderstanding that requires hands." The internet exploded. And for once, not with cruelty. Most didn't even know my name, but they recognized something in the image of a black woman in red, standing silently behind the man who chose not to stay silent anymore. By morning, hashtags like Redandriel and Shay deserved respect were trending globally. A talk show host declared the silence of black women in elite spaces is deafening. And tonight, it finally had a microphone. I used to believe that if I stayed quiet enough, I could make it through life unnoticed and unharmed. Have you ever tried to shrink just to survive, but sometimes survival means becoming the disruption? Not because you want to, but because someone has to be. Elijah's phone buzzed. His PR team no doubt begging for a statement. He read the message. Then calmly replied no. Let them watch. The truth doesn't need a press release. Outside, snow had begun to fall. I sat by the window, my knees drawn up under Elijah's coat. The city had never looked so gentle, so softened. Elijah walked over quietly and placed a mug of hot cocoa into my hands. Not a word spoken. Not a single one needed. He sat beside me. We stared into the winter night, sipping warmth. And somewhere deep within, I realized the world might not have changed. But for one night, it paused. It listened. Because of a stunning dress. A quiet woman. And a man who understood that revenge was never about raising your voice, but about standing beside someone, so the world has no choice but to hear her. If you've ever been that person quiet in the corner, silenced in the spotlight, then maybe you understand this too. It's not always about shouting louder. Sometimes it's about being seen in your silence, in your truth, in red. The morning light seeped in through the curtains, casting long golden lines across the room. Elijah lay on his side, his back to me, breathing softly like a child after a storm. I rose slowly, careful not to wake him, my body still holding the memory of everything that had happened. And there it was, my red dress, hung carefully by the window, the same one that had once felt like a target. Now the sunlight bled through the sheer fabric, turning it into something between blood and fire. But this time it didn't scare me. It just looked honest. I brewed coffee in silence, the smell curling around the edges of my thoughts. My phone buzzed beside the cup. Messages flooded in, some from people I hadn't heard from in years. I cried when I saw you standing there. My daughter says she wants to wear red to prom now. I never told you this, but you made me believe I can live out loud too. I paused, hand hovering over the screen, heart caught between tears and awe. The girl I once was, the one who hid behind dusty library shelves, had become someone others saw. And not just saw, someone they believed in. Online, the storm hadn't died. It had only grown. Elijah and I hadn't posted a single word, but the silence was louder than any statement. Duval Syntec didn't release a press release, but its stock ticked upward, slow and steady. Braden, on the other hand, was ousted from at least 3 boards. One charity announced it would be conducting a full internal culture audit. There was a time I thought that if I stayed quiet long enough, I'd be forgiven, maybe even forgotten. But can I ask you something? Have you ever confused disappearing with healing, because forgiveness doesn't come from hiding? It comes from standing at the right time in the right way. And I wore that red not to be admired, but because I was done being invisible. Later that morning, I stepped outside. The air was crisp, the city still waking up. I passed through the park, not in a hurry, just present. No one said a word, but heads turned. A few people nodded slightly, a gesture so small and so big at once. Then I heard her voice. "Are you the lady from the clip? Your dress? It's really pretty." She was maybe 12 or 13, skin the color of cinnamon, eyes wide with recognition, but not fear. I knelt to her level, meeting her gaze. "You gonna wear red too someday?" she nodded. "When I grow up. And when I'm not scared anymore." That broke something open in me. Not the kind of breaking that shatters, but the kind that finally lets the light in. Back in the room, Elijah stood by the glass, arms crossed, as if guarding something more than just the view. When he saw me, he didn't speak. He simply turned, walked over, and placed a frame in my hands. It was a photo, me standing alone under the gala lights. Shoulders back. Chin lifted. Not smiling. Just present. Beneath it, in bold letters, "This is what real looks like." I don't remember exactly when I stopped trying to please the room. Maybe it happened slowly, one refused compliment at a time, one gaze I stopped avoiding. But if you've ever been told that outfit isn't appropriate, let me remind you, appropriate doesn't mean shrinking until you disappear. It means standing in your color, in your skin, in your truth, and believing that the world will shift to meet you there. I held that frame a little tighter, letting it anchor me. I didn't wear red to rebel. I didn't wear red to provoke. I wore it because I was done apologizing for existing. And isn't that the quietest, boldest revenge of all out there voices would keep clashing? Some would defend. Some would criticize. Some would try to rewrite what happened. But none of them could undo the truth of that night, because it wasn't just about me. It was about every girl who'd ever been asked to tone it down, every woman who'd been mistaken for something less than she was, and every soul who'd ever dared to shine, and got scorched for it. So maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end. Maybe it was the beginning of something different. Not louder. Not angrier. Just more real. And if you're still here with me reading this, feeling this, I hope you know the world doesn't get to tell you what your truth should look like. You do. And if it looks like a stunning red dress on a black woman who finally chose herself, then wear it. Wear it like it's the only thing in the world that fits. In the end, this wasn't just about a slap or a dress. It was about claiming space where I was once told to shrink, about standing in the color of my truth, and knowing I no longer had to hide. If even one moment of this story made you think about your own strength, then it's done its job. I'd love to know, what would your red dress be? What would you wear, say, or do if you stopped asking for permission? And when the moment came, would you stand or would you walk away? If this story spoke to you, make sure you're subscribed, hit that like button, and keep this circle growing. Thank you for spending this time with me, and I can't wait to meet you in the next story.